The Nordic Council of Ministers office in Latvia has published this book with stories about 15 Latvians that have been in contact with the Nordics during the last 30 years. And soon we will have a discussion with two of the heroes of this book, Mara Simane and Ines Voika.
It's said that the cooperation between the Nordic countries, between the 5 Nordic countries, Iceland, Norway, Finland, Sweden and Denmark, is the closest, most integrated in the whole world. I think it's true. We have very few borders between our countries, and we cooperate very closely together. As it's today 70 years ago that this formal cooperation was started. This day has also been marked in all Nordic countries today. One of the reasons why we have this event at the Norwegian embassy is that among the 5 Nordic countries there is a kind of rotating presidency. So Norway has this task in this year, in 2022. We took over the presidency of the Nordic cooperation in January, and we will then have this task during this year. In the priorities for Norway's presidency of the Nordic cooperation, there are three main topics that was defined in advance when we planned this. And that is to have a sustainable, socially sustainable Nordics. And then second, to have a green Nordics. And third, a competitive Nordics. We thought it would be good to discuss a little bit this afternoon how do the Nordics look like from this side of the Baltic Sea? And that is a kind of topic for the book that we will present to you and talk about. It's a book that was published by the office of the Nordic Council of Ministers, and it's called Silväxtasti, Human Interest Stories. And there are a lot of interviews, dialogues in this book. And 2 of the participants in the book you see here on the panel. Ines Voika, Member of Parliament. And she's sometimes, well, at least I call you Ines the most Nordic of the members of the Parliament. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but... And then on your side we have Mara Simone. You work in the...
Cross-sectoral coordination center.
Oh, that's too difficult. It's a kind of states planning entity, right? Yeah. And then Stefan Eriksson, who is the director of the Nordic office here in Riga, that many of you might know. As you know, how we look at the world it depends on where we stand. And I would be eager to hear your views on when looking westwards towards the Nordics.
It was an initiative that our office took last year when we celebrated 30 years of our work in Latvia. It was my colleague Inga Puriņa's idea, I should say, but I think it's a very good idea. We have collected 15 or 16? 15 stories from Latvians that during these 30 years have had some kind of relation, cooperation with the Nordics. They were made as interviews that were done by Zane Ozolanya, who is also here with us. It's actually in 3 languages, in Latvian, in English, and also in Russian. Yeah, why did we decide to publish such a book? Well, it's always good, I think, with reflection and look back on how things have developed. And things have indeed developed a lot, I mean, during these 30 years. The book actually has been nominated for a typographical award here in Latvia. I don't know if we will win it, but it was still kind of an honor to be nominated. These stories that you can read, if you haven't read them, they tell about experience that Latvians have had in their contacts with Nordics. It's not about, I should say, the Nordics teaching what to do right. I mean, hopefully we are doing some things right. It's about sharing of experiences. From the Nordic side, we also have things to learn from the Baltics, from Latvia. We may have had, second part of the 20th century, we lived quite calm life. We're able to build our welfare societies, and we have gained some experiences that hopefully are useful also for the Baltics. You had another experience during that period, but it may also be of use, and we may also learn something actually from that, especially in these days, I would say. What are your memories from those times?
Okay, stop me if I speak too much. But I'm trying to be also diplomatic, so I'm thinking about a Finn, a Swede, a Norwegian, because everything with Nordic people is personal. It's very sincere, and you just mentioned that people haven't met each other and haven't been integrating so quickly throughout these last 2 years. I think we can integrate quite quickly via Zoom and things like that, so we can meet more people that way. But the personal relationships you develop with people are really important, and that's one thing that I would say is a continuity from all of the Nordic countries that I can think of. And I'll just mention a couple of people from 30 years ago. Lassi Raunio, anybody know him? Lassi Raunio was one of the people who worked with the Environmental Protection Club before Latvia regained independence. He was with the Green movement, helped the Latvian Green people get out and make their international contacts, was here, got the Latvians together with the Estonians because somehow they hadn't contacted each other on the Green movement scene at the time, and came with his friends and camped at Adolf's Pils when there were events happening there, etc. Next thing, I really think you have a wonderful residence here, Ambassador, but I'm remembering Lars Ferdinand back in the old days when he started up the first representation office that became the embassy here in Latvia. Knock, 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 dark door, come in. There's a watchman at the door because any place that had any foreigner probably had a watchman at the door. You got through, and then there was a person who would be willing to talk to you about what's going on in the world, and then get down to brass tacks. What's happening in Latvia actually, and what can we do to help? That's what it was. Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if it was you or maybe you, Ines, who also mentioned another legend here. That's Richard Berg, the very first, I think, well, some people know him. Yeah, he's legendary in Latvia.
And the reason that all happened was because we were at a crisis point, which is, I think, is a point of entry of discussion about what we are doing here as Nordics and Baltics regarding crises. Mm.
But 30 years have passed, and where do we stand now?
Rikke Helms, a Dane. We can't forget the Danes, right?
Yes.
So Rikke Helms, who actually put together the Danish Cultural Center here, working with the Latvian Popular Front. It was a people movement, actually, and everybody really appreciated. And there was such a sense of trust between all people then at the same time. There was no reason for the Nordic people to trust the Latvian people, and there was no reason for the Latvian people to trust the Nordic people. They just did, because people were doing things that were important.
I don't think we ever had an Icelandic director here. That's a mistake, but yeah. But after 30 years, Ines, you just come back from a Nordic-Baltic meeting. How would you characterize where we stand? Have we reached the end goal of how far Nordic-Baltic cooperation can reach, or what are the challenges we have ahead?
Yesterday, I was, together with my colleague Jānis Ucāns here, from the Baltic Assembly of the 3 parliaments of the Baltic countries, visiting the Nordic Assembly that has this 70 years anniversary. And we were meeting in Malmö and given a very, very special seat at the table and treatment at the Nordic Assembly's dinner. And I think one of the reasons why there were these I had never heard such passionate speeches towards the Baltics since the 90s, when my connection started with the Danish Culture Institute and Rikke Helms, and listening to her stories and her car being burned down during the barricades of January 91, and then building the new Nordic Information Office in the middle of 90s. The passion there in Malmö was very similar to those in the 90s. And the answer to that, of course, is the war. And there were no Ukrainians amongst us in Malmö, but it was a feeling that the Nordics were talking to us, the Baltics, like we were the forefront of the fight in Ukraine. And they were talking so much about the importance of being all of us together, all 8 of us. And in some ways, that you asked the question, what can we learn from the Nordics? And we still need and keep learning from the Nordics, and many of us have. But today, and yesterday when we spoke to the representatives of 5 countries, it is as a feeling that now it is not learning from the Nordics, but waking up the Nordics to a bigger extent that there was a big unity. It was a big hall of the Nordic Council is much bigger than the Baltic Council, so it's 100 at least members of the parliaments and their ministers, their development ministers. But we all together need to wake up and to raise to the challenge the current situation is raising, and we can only do it together. And I think there's 30 years of building the trust, and building the trust through people who had the experience of learning the Nordics in a deep way, in a very hard way. My first year, I have lived only 1 year in Denmark, but that winter was one of the hardest years of my life. At the same time, this Danish Folkehøjskole, which is part of my story in this book, is also one of the 2 schools in my life that has made the huge, huge difference in who I am today. So because of these things and these connections we have had over the years, the things we have built in the Baltics, in Latvia, because of the help and the passionate people that brought this help to us, we are in a much different situation now here in Latvia to help Ukraine, to raise our voice with our partners in Europe, and to see what we can continue to do. But the question is how well are we integrated and what is happening? It is, in a way, on one hand, it is, I will not be politically correct, is okay?
It's okay,
Yeah.
yes.
It's like, the old honesty of, wine drinking at Rikke's Helm's place or Richard's Baruch's kitchen table. We're really discussing and trying to discern. I think now there is no time to be diplomatically correct, because we really need to understand what is the best and how really to do, and when and what are the tasks now, and what will be the tasks when we will have to rebuild Ukraine and rebuild Belarus and free and democratic Russia. So the tasks, in a way, are the same, will be the same soon, or the questions are very similar that they were 30 years ago. So in that way, to look back at how we have been united is, I think, very, very important.
Well, when I see the engagement and the passion that Latvia and the other Baltic countries as well, I think are now trying to help the Ukrainians. I mean, it reminds me of the engagement of the Nordics 30 years ago. Of course, there was not a war, but still there was a willingness to engage, to help with all the means we had.
Yes, it is almost the same, but it is a little different because we're talking about a period in time where so many people have been in so many bubbles. So in the Baltic states at the period, Latvians and Russian-speaking Latvian people from Latvia, everyone had been in the Soviet bubble. Everybody understood doublespeak. It was a given. It was an understood thing. Now we have new generations who have little understanding of that. We also have real serious bubbles that we have to break through in order to get discussions going. Because the answer isn't going to be how well one side or another side gets organized, but how we can get dialogue between people who have been in different belief systems, how we can get them to a place which is democratic and which is the discussion that happens at the Nordic Baltic tables. You mentioned the word trust, Ines, and in your story, Maras, trust is a key word, I would say. You're mentioning, well, actually a publication that we published some years ago about the Nordic gold, trust. I mean, in my word before that, this was a word, at least in Swedish, that I wasn't really, using very often. I wasn't thinking much about it, but it really has become a word on everyone's lips in a way. The importance of social trust to society. We called it in this publication Nordic Gold. I mean, to be really honest, I think we have a crisis of trust all over the world. In government, we have it in the Nordics as well. We've lived through a pandemic that also has had an influence on the level of trust. It's not solved, but I think it's still very important to talk about it. But how serious do you think this crisis of trust is? Crisis of trust, it's interesting. It's so complicated. I hope everybody talks about it afterwards, after we leave. But basically, we put trust as one of the 4 major goals that we want to achieve in this next period until 2027 in the country. And that was basically also a happenstance that we were discussing this when we were putting together the next National Development Plan. And what we're seeing is that if the minute something doesn't meet your expectations, you have a trust issue. So the question is sometimes questions about what your expectations are. Then the other issue is what happens in a situation of conflict. This trust changes. You have to trust the person who's pulling you out of the rubble. Excuse me, you have to, whoever it is. Then you can get to the point where you start talking about where your commonalities are, where your differences are. It's a point of discussion. But what has happened in Latvia, I think, was everybody came out of the new independence thinking we're all going to evolve and sustainably, economically, competitively, and what was the third one? Socially, equally. And what happened was it didn't happen that way. It wasn't that easy to get income inequality increased. Sense of distrust, that has been a hard issue that we've had to deal with, and it has to do, right now it's a situation that's at the forefront for a lot of older people in the country. Mm. And I think a lot of older people are the ones whose hearts are being torn apart right now because they don't understand what they got their independence from, where they might return if something doesn't change. Income is very hard to come by. There wasn't a possibility for a lot of people to return to jobs that they had of a certain status when there was a different industrialization system, economic system, etc.
The existence and the influence of social media, how that is influencing trust.
Well, I think that the social media has led to people being in groups and out groups. People need in groups because they have to feel like they belong to something. And in Latvia, people trusted their friends and neighbors. And then they started kind of slowly, people started trusting others. basically, and then you get to a point where you kind of are used to trusting people. But the polarization is global, so it's happening everywhere, and it's being used, and we're being manipulated by it. So I think it's a very important thing to discuss, and I'm sure that that's what you're doing at the Parliament, talking about that.
If I could say one thing that has not happened, what exists in the Nordics, it is the trust between politicians, the government, and the people in Latvia. It is so low, and it is, you can see not only from the books and the studies and the social psychology, but from practice. It is my first term in the Parliament. The first 4 years will be coming to an end, and the way people look at you and they talk about what you do is totally different the moment you enter that system. And I can see that it slows down things. You have to think 3 times before talking honestly to people. Of course, communication is, you always have to talk, think what you say, but it is so much more difficult than in the Nordic countries. You could see it during the COVID crisis, how the Nordic governments handled it, how the Swedish government, for example, survived over, the trusting the institutions. Okay, it's not going well, but they know what they do. And here, even if it goes well, they don't know what they do. It's just a given. We don't know, and these things we repeat and repeat. That if we just had better politicians, they are all this stupid and.
It's not that bad.
But this is what I hear.
No, it is bad. You're right in a certain sense. But I can tell you, it's not that bad. We've commissioned. We've just recently, this last year, commissioned 3 studies. So one is about the European Social Survey. The other is about the World Survey, inter-parliamentarian. And the third one is we're now a part of the OECD Trust Group, where the leaders are the Nordics, of course. So, and everywhere, trust in politicians is really low, very low. But Latvia is ridiculously low as far as trust in politicians, the parliament, and political parties. And if something doesn't change, it's really serious. And I think a lot of it has to do with the behavior of the politicians regarding communication.
Okay, tell me.
Communication, like how many people actually take their Fridays and go out and talk to people? How many parliamentarians do that? The next issue, maybe. Do you talk to everybody? I know. Well, maybe we're talking to.
No, not at all.
And then the issue is how many political parties actually want people. The same thing with NGOs. How many NGOs actually want extra members? So that's another issue. And what we found from inter-parliamentarian study from the World Values Survey is basically that she did a K-variant analysis, where she clustered different groups of people and how they came together. And she has a group of factors which come together, and she calls it the precariat. People who live in very unsure situations. So maybe insufficient income, maybe far in the countryside with no interesting jobs to be had, maybe not feeling as an insider because of language difficulties or something like that. Precariat, not feeling secure. My question is, when your media bubbles come in and help people feel even more insecure regarding each other, are we going to be increasing trust or decreasing it? And what's going to happen to the poor politicians? And what's going to happen to democracy?
Yeah, these are huge issues. I will pick up on another word you mentioned, values. And I will ask a little bit provocative question, if I may.
Yes.
I may, thank you. I mean, we talk sometimes about common values, and I think we all can agree that they are important, especially in these times. And we sometimes talk about Nordic values, and we want to bring them. Really, we want to bring them to Latvia. But there may be some challenges here, and I sometimes quote a very interesting book that I have read by a Latvian anthropologist, that's Danovska, whom you most likely know. You may have even read her book, School of Europeanness, Tolerance and Other Lessons in Political Liberalism in Latvia, which, well, in short, as I understood it, I mean, talks about the challenges of the changing values. I mean, sometimes in the Nordics we may think that well, our values are shared by, should at least be shared by everyone on the whole planet. That our values are, so to say, mainstream, but in some aspects they may not be. They may be, but maybe not extreme, but they are and yeah. Well, the question would be, are you familiar with Dacia and her book
Yes.
yeah? Would you comment on that? I mean, have we been maybe at some stage pushing too hard on certain issues, or what would be your take there?
Well, about pushing, I think my feeling also from the Nordic meeting is that now we are also on the different parliamentary governmental levels, that now we have been working together for many decades, so it's good to push each other, right? Back and forth a bit. It's not only like being diplomatic, okay, we'll bring you this, we can push each other. But on the values question, I think the war in Ukraine has put it into a bigger perspective, and maybe what we would have been discussing before on the smaller differences. Oh, I can tell how I was suffering from the differences I discovered in Danish and the Soviet Latvia societies as I was living in this dark winter in the middle of nowhere in Denmark. I didn't know if I really liked that. All the values of individualism, self-responsibility, and all of this. Oh, you wanted the wine, you should have asked. But, decades later, I took it as a positive sign. You have to be responsible for your actions. If you really want something, do it. The question of hospitality is another thing. But putting this aside, I think the war and the values we are basing our societies on, and that are written in the charter, the documents of the European Union. Not all the Nordic countries are in the European Union, but the values unite us. They are human dignity, freedom, rule of law, democracy, human rights. And these are the questions, and this is the front line between Russian invasion and what Ukraine is fighting for, and what Belarusian democracy is trying to withstand. And that is the front line that was in Riga 30 years ago, when the barricades were built here. So in that way, there is, I think, no question that we are building our societies on the same values. And that should help us to be united. And the world today is black and white, and I think, there are some discussions maybe we should stop having and look together with a bigger picture that we really, can do and help. And having worked in Ukraine in the past 8 years since the invasion of Crimea, with the institution building, the rule of law and democracy is my values that I have been professionally before the parliament working on. I can really, and I believe in this, and sometimes you think, but maybe, some other values of competitiveness or this and that, some other values are more important than just, building the rule of law and building your institutions and state-wise. And Ukraine didn't have a lot of trust in their institutions. They were a little bit in the Soviet mode. Okay, we have them, but something else is working better than our institutions. But they did try not to be cynical and tried and did the work to build them, to build their military, to build their government, to build their structures. And I think this is part of what helps them now to withstand the aggression, because they can trust in the government. And of course, the value of democracy, even this, in a way, we have never debated it in the Nordics, right? Or should we have the democracy and elect our parliaments or whatnot? But that value in Ukraine and Russia is so, the difference is such a visible thing, that they elected their own parliament, their own president, and now they can trust it. And of course, Ukrainians have said, like also in Latvia, where's the strong hand? We want Singapore model, right? We have this good dictator, and then he will clean up corruption. My issue is corruption, so it will take forever. Let's have a strong hand and it will clean. Good dictators are only in fairy tales and in Singapore. So I have been trying to tell them it's slow way, but democracy is the only way. Free press that uncovers and uncovers, building the institutions and making this society work is, I think, something that probably we have been told by the Nordic people back then. Maybe we don't remember it. I don't remember it as a quote, but that is what we came to believe in through what we have seen in the societies and how they live, and then how we build it in the countries where help to build the countries, reach with the hand where the front line is. The relationships were very passionate. A lot of people coming and wanting to help, and informal and formal networks, money given by the government, people coming, groups exchanging. It was much more difficult to travel, but buses would go to Denmark from Ventspils library, or a lot of different real exchanges happening. And then somehow now our diplomats sometimes tell, okay, I am sitting in this embassy in a Nordic country X, and it's so difficult to get the country's politicians to even talk to me about what is happening in Latvia. The attention is elsewhere. China, I don't know what the US. Of course, there are many important issues in the world, but the attention from the Nordic institutions, of course, not the Nordic Council, but somehow the elites had shifted. Maybe now it's back. And I think we have benefited from these passionate relationships, and I would like to restore part of that and renew what we have. And then we have a lot of people. There's a story that is mentioned in the book. It was that was Richard Baruk's idea, and we were totally crazy, I think, at that time. He said, oh, there are about 1,000 people who have been to all these folkehøjskoles in all the Nordics. Let's make a festival of all the people coming to this festival and speaking all the Nordic languages. And because actually I have to say thank you to Richard that I understand Swedish and Norwegian, and sometimes I can even pretend to speak it from my Danish, because he said no English in my office. And you have to, when you speak Danish, you have to, but Latvian is your mother tongue, you have to learn it. It's not coming naturally to this. But so we would come, all this, there was this dream of thousands of Latvians speaking the Nordic language, talking about the Nordic values and living the Nordic values. And I believe that that light and passion and what we have been given through this is still there. So.
Well, I think you have a point there. I mean, unfortunately, people, politicians, people in general can only focus on a couple of things at the same time. And of course, the passion that was present in the beginning of the 90s, by time, less and less, and situation and relations were, I would say, probably normalized, and this may be good in a way, because I mean we had established links, we had transport, ferries, flights, people were meeting each other, but nothing, so to say, dramatic was happening. But I think also you have a point in that the interest in daily life, in culture from the Baltics has been too low. I mean, it embarrassingly low, I should say. But this is something that has to be encouraged more. And I would say that in general, the interest, let's say, in Nordic culture from the Baltic side has been bigger than the opposite, and that's bad. I don't like that. This is something
But culture was
we should work on.
But culture was the in to get into the beginning relationships, and then from that moving forward into building the democratic society that Ines was speaking about. And I think our big challenge in this neighborhood is we're not going to have peace until we have some neighbors who have got a little bit of democratic understanding of democratic systems. And the problem is that Latvia was fortunate. We had our democratic past. We could dream about some past we never experienced ourselves, but we knew it existed. But the real problem now is how do we help countries who don't even know they want help, maybe, get away from autocratic leaders, totalitarianism, and understand that democracy is not a threat.
I think on this optimistic note, then we can finish our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you to all three of you.